So I'm known much more for rent to rent, especially service accommodation in the UK.
Yeah.
But I actually started that in Dubai because after that experience, I was really put off buying anymore. And so I went ahead and got my first subleasing property there.
So what we would call as rent to rent here.
Yeah. Although I went to open different businesses. So I invested in a food and beverage a company and a beauty salon and stuff. And I learned so much, yeah. But ultimately, because of some personal issues, and I'm okay to talk about that, I had a few miscarriages after I got married in 2016.
Lesley, somebody with a legal background that's built a multi-million-pound portfolio, young kids, spent 10 years in Dubai as well. How's that all happened?
Over time.
Okay.
So it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
But if I can build a property empire and have good cash flow businesses, then I'm sure everybody can at least try if they want to be an entrepreneur. Yeah.
That's what I love about you. Very busy person, got multiple businesses, young kids to look after as well. You know, legal background in terms of busy career. You've had those up, yet you've still managed to build things that are quite substantial.
I think I have a fire in my belly, and I had to think about this psychologically of what keeps me ticking apart from my family. But why do I have that fire? So my nan, when my brother was born, so he's younger than me, told my mum that she had she'd given birth to us the wrong way around.
Okay.
Yeah, because she said that because in her sort of generation, so my nan's not with us anymore, unfortunately, but she passed in her 90s.
Wow.
Yeah, so she lived for quite a while. But so she saw a lot. She went through obviously the world wars and lived in different countries as well. Yeah, but for her, when she was growing up, which was in China before it turned into a communist China, she wasn't allowed to get an education. Yeah, so in our culture, especially back then, it was like the boys were more sort of valuable in some ways, or they had a different role.
They want to add more value to the family. I get that. You see that in many other cultures as well, we've seen in the past.
Yeah, so she came from the background where my great grandfather, her dad, we used to be a big landowner.
Okay.
Yeah, in a province in China.
Yeah.
Obviously, that all got taken away. Yeah. But she had the opportunity to get private education, but they would have let her because it was a cultural and generational thing, I think. Yeah. So when I was...
How did you break the mold?
Because of what she said, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that still drives me today because it's like, because you're a woman, you can't do that. And I don't know why, it's just always been in the back of my mind. Like, why can't I do that? Yeah. Yeah, I'll give it a go and give it my best shot. But what's missing apart from the fact genetically or society has a different sort of, function for me? Yeah, so that was interesting. I think that because of that, I've always wanted to do the best that I could at something.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that I've always been successful, but with that sort of spirit and the family foundation that we've got at home, I've always been able to bounce back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you first get involved in property then?
So it wasn't, I grew up with it.
Okay.
So it's been in our family because of my dad. Yeah, he was, should I start with his story? Because that's quite inspiring. But I didn't get involved until I was in my late 20s. Yeah. But my dad came over from Taiwan to the UK, and he used to work, he used to be a professional basketballer in Taiwan, hence I'm quite tall.
Wow.
Yeah. And but when he came over here, so he had a lot of popularity. I think he attended uni there without having to actually go to any classes. And he was a networker. So but when he came over here, things are very different. So he's not tall enough here to make it professionally.
Right.
And he also found out that he couldn't actually feed himself with the skill set. So he started from scratch. So he decided that education wasn't for him because initially he came over to learn English. Right. Yeah, so he started in Chinatown and he was basically washing all the dishes in the kitchen. So he started from there. Okay. But he had that fire in his belly. So I think it's that competitive spirit that we have in our family, I would say. Yeah. And he worked his way up to become a head chef quite fast. I think it was within 2 or 3 years he did that. And then started his own business and then got into property as a result.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember asking my dad this question. So, because always looked at auction properties. So we always had some sort of brochures lying around the house. I was like, so Dad, how do you actually afford these properties? And I remember he used to tell me that we have our business, which was a Chinese restaurant in Cambridge then. So he said that is the cash cow, but your biggest partner is always the bank.
Right.
Yeah, because they will look at your business and see the history and your repayment history as well. To lend you money, but I think borrowing money back in the 90s was rather different to now, because he can literally have a conversation with his
bank manager, could and talk to them. Yeah.
And his English is not very good, and still is not very good. So if Dad could do it, now we've had the education when it comes to my generation and all the tools. Why can we not do it, right? So I started my property journey when I was back in Dubai. So this is the bit of conflict, and maybe second generation or third generation people that are not from England originally might have gone or are going through the same thing. So your parents have provided you with the education, or the country has, with a great education. But what do you do with it, right? Yeah. So I went down the legal route. And I did all of the studies. I did my degree, I got a master's, went to law school, then I went to Dubai and I worked there. But why did I get into property?
Yeah.
Because I think at that point, I just couldn't see a future for me in it was a very big law firm.
Right.
I was working for a really good team in litigation, and I was working directly for the managing partner. He was lovely. He was a multi-millionaire. So but to be able to get to that position, you've got to sacrifice a lot. It's timing, because your time has to be made into billable time.
Yeah.
Yep. If you wanted to climb up the corporate ladder, I just couldn't see myself doing that. Yeah. I wasn't maybe I wasn't hungry enough for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I always wanted at some point to start a family. And I think most career people actually might delay that because of they want to sort their career out first. So I saw a lot of people
struggling with that balance of did they start a family, or did they wait and build their way themselves up a corporate ladder?
Yeah, and obviously you've got to meet the right partner as well. So I didn't meet my current partner till I actually before I turned 30, literally. Okay. But so I started my journey in Dubai in 2011. Okay. I think I had a bit of a review on life and what I wanted out of it, and decided I want to do property because, because property's always been in the family as well in the UK. But in my head, I think it's because of this: can women do better than men? Or can you be on the same playing field? I always saw it very separately, but my mindset's changed about that nowadays since I've come back, and so working with the family. So I always wanted to build my own first, and I learned some great lessons from doing that. So initially, because I had a job, I was working and I could leverage my salary to get a mortgage out. So this is the most common way
in Dubai,
where people can buy property even today, right? So you've got some sort of income, which is usually a salary. But in Dubai, so this is back then, so let's say 2011, I bought like 4 properties, and so leveraged off my salary, but they wouldn't count any other income, rental income into your salary calculations.
So it's just limited by whatever you're earning, whatever that would allow you to borrow, as opposed to your income you were earning from property as well.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas in the UK, they look at all your income, don't they? So that was very interesting. So you're limited by your income, how much you could continue to purchase at that point. This is a big difference between being on a salary and having a business, right? Yeah. If it was a business, you could look at what the company, how that's what that's bringing in. And I raised the deposits of some savings and JVs with family and friends, like close family and friends, to raise the initial deposit. But I ran into a problem when I was buying the 5th property, which was off plan. So it was, and that was very embarrassing actually, because being a lawyer in Dubai, and I know how the legal stuff works, and I did all the due diligence, it just shows you if someone or a company wants to go out and scam you is fairly easy as well, right?
They can pull the wool over your eyes if they're determined to do it.
Yeah, they used a great law firm, a very well-known American law firm. I sort of knew, some people there who represented them, and everything checked out. There wasn't anything that didn't check out.
Okay.
But what happened was that I brought off-plan on a hotel off-plan property in Jumeirah Lake Towers, which is opposite the marina in Dubai. Yeah. Okay. And it was just, we were getting delays quite a bit. And that's when I got concerned about it. But the stories that came out of it was then really weird. So I brought it for an agency, and they had brought a whole floor themselves. So invest in a whole
floor. Themselves, or were they selling that floor?
I'm not too sure what they were doing with it, but I knew that they had invested in as well.
But sometimes what will happen is the brokers commit to a floor and then go and sell that all those units.
Yeah, that's very normal in Dubai. And for example, lease options in Dubai is something that you can actually buy as a product from the agencies as well.
Right.
So that's interesting. But they didn't used to have it back then.
Right.
Yeah, it didn't exist. Yeah. So I decided not to go with the agency because they weren't sort of moving much in terms of, and I thought, my issue might get lumped into their whole floor kind of negotiation. So I didn't want that. So I went and I took a really good friend of mine who speaks Arabic to go and speak to them, because they are mainly Arabic. The developer was from I can't remember, it was Bahraini or Kuwaiti family originally. So we got there. So it's all a little bit bizarre. It's not like a first world setup where you might have a solid answer to something. Yeah. So what transpired from the office sort of manager was that the son of the father who owned the company had misused the funds.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, how is that even possible? Because back in Dubai, when you are developing a plot of land or a block of flats, it needs to go into sort of like an escrow account, which is a government like protected. Yeah, but it's protected by the government, so that the funds don't get released until you sort of reach another stage. Yeah, but that was very interesting, because obviously this is all theory, right? But in practice, I suppose people find loopholes around all of that.
Just goes to show you could have a contract that's watertight.
Yeah.
If someone's determined to scam you, they could find a way to do it.
People decide to disappear as well back to their own country, right? Then what happens? Yeah, decide not to.
You pursue.
Yeah, exactly. So I knew for a fact that I didn't want to go to court, because I knew that it would have to go through the Dubai courts, which everything would need to be translated in, or everything would be in Arabic. So you'd have to hire an Arabic lawyer and then translate it back to English so I can actually understand what's happening. Wow. And because being in that sort of litigation world, that would have cost a bomb itself. So we went to negotiate. So I took my bestie along, and she was very nice. It's a way to negotiate. It's a bit like a dance, right? So I said, I didn't tell them I didn't want to go to court though. Yeah, so we had to put a bit of pressure on. But in the end, we came out with a really good result. So I got 90% of my money back. Had we not done that, I think it would have been a bit of a loss there, more of a loss. 10% went actually to line the pockets of the office manager. So that was his sort of commission, as we put it, in a nice way.
That sounds like still a good result. I mean, that 10% is a lesson and a learning.
Yeah, I took the hit for that 10%. But I would say that's quite a good result, right? But it took a lot of, for someone who's not really been through loads of problems at that point before, in terms of, because these things come up in business. Now it's...
So the other four was smooth, and then this one hit a...
Yeah, so I actually would not buy off plan because of that experience ever again, unless if it's in the Middle East, the developer's Emaar.
Okay.
Yeah, I quite like them.
Big established developer.
Yeah, because they've, over time, you've seen how they have been, with the different crashes, COVID, 2008, 2009. Yeah, and how they've handled these things. So that was interesting. Okay. But from that point on, so I'm known much more for rent to rent, especially service accommodation in the UK. Yeah. But I actually started that in Dubai because after that experience, I was really put off buying anymore, because you sort of lose a bit of confidence, right? And I didn't see that as a win then. Now I look back and I think that was actually a win, because we were actually able to recover those funds.
Didn't feel like a win at the time.
No, at that point, I was so embarrassed, because I think it was a bit of ego as well, right? And to be honest with you, it's just ego, because I'm in the legal field working with one of the best law firms, and I did my best, but I still saw it as a loss then.
Yeah.
But now I really feel completely different about it. So I would advise so many different things if I had to advise a Lesley back then, right, to see things a little bit differently. But it's a good thing that happened, because had that not happened, I wouldn't have looked into creative ways to how else to earn money from property. Yeah. And rent to rent, which is the sublease model. So you don't own the property that you earn money from. That's what attracted me to go and look at that avenue more. Okay. And in Dubai then, I tried to find support groups or property groups, who were, they were doing something different that I didn't know about. I was reading a lot of Robert Kiyosaki books, because he was talking about all these different strategies that I've never heard of. Mm-hmm. But I wondered where we could implement that in Dubai, because obviously nobody was talking about these sort of strategies then. And perhaps from what I understand, the information on how to go about doing these kind of the rent-to-rent strategy, Airbnb or share properties is still very limited for the Middle East, especially in Dubai market. There's not so much information. But I did find a group where we were playing a cash flow board game.
Right.
I think I was the only lady that attended.
Oh, really?
Yeah, most of the people were guys from sort of Asian backgrounds, But they were obviously very switched on. Because they were running the subleasing strategy,
right?
Yeah, and giving me some tips about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that sort of opened up my mind to, this is possible. Yeah. And so I went ahead and got my first subleasing property.
Okay.
There.
So what we would call as rent to rent here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for rent to rent is when you rent a property from a landlord. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you go sublease it on. Yeah. And it depends, there's different rental models you can use. Yeah. But in Dubai, I did the share model, so a share property model. And it was very good. I think I used to clear, so just from the top of my head, at least two grand net from that model. Okay. So very quickly I scaled up.
That's in sterling or?
It's in sterling.
Okay.
Yeah. So roughly around bit over 10,000 dirhams, right. So about £2,000. So
like an average salary almost.
Yeah. I scaled up to 5,
fine.
And then I left my job because I was sort of replaced disclosing salaries. Yeah. I could replace my income from there and more.
Okay.
And then went on to invest in some different businesses in Dubai at that point. So that all happened around 2013 to 2016. Yeah. And it was the properties that, although I went to open different businesses, so I invested in a food and beverage company, and a beauty salon and stuff. But
all completely random and unrelated.
It was a bit random because I was like, I better spread the eggs a little bit, and I learned so much. Yeah. But ultimately, because of some personal issues, and I'm okay to talk about that, I had a few miscarriages after I got married in 2016. I decided to come back to the UK because I've been away for so long at the end of 2018, and had to start from scratch again. Because of the laws in Dubai, I knew that those rent-to-rent properties I could only keep them for a certain time. Yeah, now the laws have changed.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's ways around it now in Dubai, So I had to build that property income, let's say, from scratch.
Right. So 2018, you moved back to the UK.
Yeah, I moved back to the UK. I went on a few different courses to understand what was going on in the UK, how the property market was working. My family live in Cambridge, and we have some properties and commercial properties as well. My dad was really against me, by the way, doing rent to rent. He was like, I don't understand why you're doing that. Why don't you go look at some bigger stuff, do some more commercial stuff.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is because I don't want to depend on my parents, for the income. I knew that strategy worked and is a good basis to learn how to manage and control a business or your properties in the UK as a starting block. So my dad understood it afterwards, though. Where that thinking came from. And part of it was because they brought me up to earn my own money, right, through a job or through my property ventures, that I wanted to build that sort of cash flow foundation base first before we looked at some bigger stuff.
Yeah, they probably wanted you to put the money into assets, go and buy some property rather than what are you paying somebody rent.
Yeah, and running around a lot, especially in the beginning. There's a lot of running around. Yeah, but there was a reason for it, so he understood
And
it.
it can feel a bit like it's a managing agent, a letting agency type business where you're just managing somebody else's property. And to some extent you are, but you get paid really well for that.
Yeah. So I came back into the UK. So we started, and I know a lot of people get their deals from agencies, but apart from one, we got our deals direct to landlords.
Right. Okay.
So a lot of networking, getting the word out, meeting a lot of people, which was quite enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what happened, because we went from 6 units to 12 units.
Okay.
And then at the moment we've got, I think, about 70 units. Okay. But what created that big jump was actually we took over another agency's portfolio on a rent to rent. So they had quite a big portfolio, blocks of flats, HMOs, and then it kept growing. But then I put a cap on it because we had COVID, right? So COVID was a bit of a disaster all around, though. Yeah. So
a lot of business was suffering at the time.
Yeah, lots closed down, lots of business lost, but you've got, in terms of lots of money lost. Yeah, we had a cancellation of at least 50 grand in 1 week when the news got mentioned in March. Yeah. And this was me preempting that there was going to be ripple effect from Wuhan and China, just keeping up with the news of what's happened there. But we didn't. We moved, but it wasn't fast enough because we had so many units.
You'd anticipated a problem, but not a wave that big.
Yeah, where nobody could,
nobody had at that time.
Yeah, but you've got to be, the reason why we're still here is because we had to change how we do things. Yeah. A lot of people, I think, that suffered, buried their head in the sand a lot. Yeah. But I think you've got to be really proactive. Yeah. Do you keep your units? Or not? You have to negotiate with the landlords, right? And tell them what's going on and switch rental models.
Yes. Yeah. Well, for us during COVID, our income literally just plummeted, and we weren't alone. Everybody was in the same.
You've got
boat.
Different businesses as well, right?
Yes.
But it all went.
Yes. So all the businesses were kind of having their different challenges, and you think, okay, so how do we fix this problem? And luckily in that business, I'd asked my business partner, started focusing on, right, where can we get NHS staff? Because they're the ones that are still out and about, they're still moving. And we managed to just keep the income going. We weren't making a huge amount of money, but what it meant was we could still sustain what we had and ride through that period. So that really helped us quite a lot. And then once that all changed and we started to slowly build it back up, we were just talking off camera now that the SA model is very different now to, say, 5-6 years ago. There's how do you find that in Cambridge right now?
Very competitive. And if I'm finding that in Cambridge, which is a very buoyant and small market, I would say, it must be even of a greater scale in Birmingham, for example.
It certainly is competitive without doubt.
Yeah. But so if you're following the theme of this interview, and I'm sure if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to be flexible and creative and find the niches. Yeah. So I was off camera, we were having a discussion about the market. So the Cambridge market is definitely much better than this year compared to last year. We were still suffering because China was still closed last year. So we weren't getting the influx from the Chinese visitors. Because they only opened their doors recently.
Okay.
And I was reading a report that was issued, I think it was last year, but it was for the universities. So there was a warning given that brace yourselves, because you're not going to be getting the same amount of students coming from China as you did in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, because their borders were not. They only started traveling earlier this year. Opened the borders up to let people out.
Okay.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
do you think that will now go back to normality, whatever normality was, or?
I think I wish it would go back to normality, but I'm always very cautious because no one could have predicted the COVID. Yeah. We've seen an influx of lots of students from India, by the way, which has been, since the beginning of this year, we've been seeing that because of the housing accommodation requirements. Have you seen that from on the ground here?
I'm probably a little bit detached from people that come and stay in our properties because the team,
Yeah.
They take care of that. So I'm often unaware who's actually staying in our property.
It's okay. We usually don't have students in our properties, but because of COVID, we've opened up all criterias.
Okay.
So we sort of entertain more and see, and as a result of that, see what the demands are in the market. Yeah, so that's been interesting.
It's an interesting point that we're talking about different nationalities, and then earlier we were talking also about Dubai and then the kind of culture there. And so when we think about accommodation in Dubai, often it's super swanky, high-rise apartments with Burj Al Arab views or whatever, and that's the default view that we have in our mind. But actually, all accommodation isn't like that. It's very different.
Yes. In Dubai, there are different tiers. So in Dubai, there's different... how do I phrase this without sounding discriminative, or should I just put it out there anyway? Because it is discriminative in Dubai.
Yeah, literally it is.
It is.
There is no other way to describe it.
It depends where you come from, what passport you're holding. And depending on... So what passport you hold, by the way, also would determine if you're going to work in Dubai, your salary. Yeah, so as a British passport holder, you're most likely to get a high paid salary, whereas somebody who probably has the same qualifications as you, if they come from a different country, such as Philippines, for example, they won't get offered the same amount. So
they might be doing the same job.
Yeah, same job.
Same skill level.
Yeah, they might even be better at than you at your job. Yeah, but because
of their passport, they'll automatically be given a lower salary, offered a lower salary.
Yeah, when I went to Dubai, there wasn't anybody who was Chinese looking. We had a lot of people from Philippines there who was working in the legal industry.
Yeah,
I always used to get asked. People used to ask me whether I was from the Philippines or as cabin crew was the other one that I used to get all the time. Yeah, so but it's just the way it is, because although Dubai, you get how it's presented, and it is very luxurious. You get like an amazing experience, especially if you go on holiday there. But there's a whole category of different people and different sort of wages or classes that all coexist in that sort of in that state. Yeah.
So we were talking earlier, you have like the super rich in terms of earners.
So people can add to this, but I think there are four main categories. So you've got your super rich, who they are owners of conglomerates or businesses, Then you've got those that come and they're wealthy expats, and they get, they don't pay taxes on their salary there, so they can save a lot.
High-earned professional.
High earners, For example, my boss, like he used to have a collection of supercars.
Okay.
Yeah. And the partners in law firms, like everybody was driving a Ferrari. They used to rock up at work. It was quite cool. Their Bentleys and other cool cars. So that was a big thing. And then you'd have the category where they would be earning quite well, but maybe it's because of their nationality.
Right.
So it's not that standard, but it depends how they utilize their money. Sort of in that sort of, I would say, 5,000 dirham to 10,000 dirham, so £1,000 to £2,000 sort of range, And then you have those under the 5,000 dirham range, which is people that work in the service industry a bit more. So it could be beauticians or people who work at the hotel, etc. Yeah, so you get those sort of
restaurants, cleaners.
Yeah,
these kind of and unskilled work.
They all need somewhere to live. And there are people that live, let's say, not the first two categories, but the last two, where they can't pay their rent. So in Dubai, often the rent is paid in 1 to 4 checks. And depending on if you want to pay in one check, you can negotiate a slightly lower rent.
It's like an annual advance rent.
So you pay that in advance. But those people who are probably more a bit more cautious of their money as well, or they're slightly lower income, they need to have a monthly rental. So there's a massive demand there.
Okay. So this is like entry-level accommodation. We don't really think about. There's actually quite a big demand for that type of accommodation.
Yes, and so there's something there. There's a massive demand, but not enough supply. And the reason there's not enough supply is because of the regulations in Dubai. the laws have changed a little bit now. So when I was living in Dubai, you couldn't live with your boyfriend. You'd have to be married to technically live together. Now, but that happens anyway. But it would only become a problem if somebody reported you, or for some reason you fell out. There's
no real enforcement unless somebody.
Unless it was a malicious report, or for some reason the police, wanted to get something on you. So that would usually wouldn't have a problem, because there would be people who are expats who are sharing a flat together. But there is, as we said, a massive demand in the lower categories. And in Dubai, technically speaking, you're not allowed to share properties. However,
so these are like HMOs, effectively.
Yeah, HMOs, because there's not a regulated space. But I hope that it will be regulated at some point because of the demand. But what's ended up happening, so in the sort of older Dubai, is that you will get properties where people are doing sharing, but there's absolutely a problem with overcrowding, because it could be like loads of bunk beds, or people may partition within rooms and living rooms as well. And it's just not very safe, but that's how they survive. Very substandard accommodation, but it exists in the same city, which is all glitz and gold. So that it's quite interesting though, because you have that as well. Whereas then you've got the wealthy expats and super rich that are operating at a completely different level.
Yes. We've opened the topic of Dubai, so just following that theme. So you lived there for about 10 years. You're in the legal industry there. How have you seen the property market change or evolve during that time, from what it was then to just before you left?
Dubai is very interesting. So with Dubai, I think you've just got to remember, I think the rulers, or the people that control the state, they are very clever. They're very clever because they're always trying to attract people's money to come into the country, or companies to bring their money into the country. So in that sense, it's never going to be too dry, if that makes sense. So Dubai is very interesting. And there will always be something. So when I was there was the Expo 2020, which they made a bid for, and they won that. I think that brought a lot of, they were able to recover from COVID quite quick, because they had the Expo after the COVID. So it's very interesting. And I think, but the problem is that Dubai seems to go through this cycle of a 10-year crash. And when it crashes, it crashes. So I've never seen, but I was
It's not really a slowdown when it falls on its face.
So back in 2000, I went to Dubai in 2009, right at the beginning, and it took a little bit of time to have the ripple effect from the rest of the world who were crashing in 2008, right? But literally, I was telling you, I saw abandoned cars all on the street. So there's a very busy road, the Sheikh Zayed road, right? Which is the road that has like so many lanes on both sides that goes from one end of Dubai all the way to Abu Dhabi. So that was empty. So imagine that. So I remember driving down there, and there were empty buildings that were not complete.
Right.
And lots of abandoned cars everywhere, and it was just empty. And I remember going through that period.
And the reason for this was where people couldn't pay their debts, and if you bounce a check at that point, you could end up in prison if you can't pay your debts. So people just abandoned the country and just...
so a lot of expats, and Dubai was, they were just going up and up and up at that point as well. So they all brought properties, or they got a loan out. They might have a car loan, credit card. It's very easy to get financing in Dubai if you have a job. Very easy, You get personal loan out or a mortgage. So once they lost their jobs, because the jobs were going, they had to flee the country, literally, because if at that point the laws were if you couldn't pay your debts, so you would need to give a check to the bank, which they would leave blank, and they would then cash it in if you were not making your installment payments, and that would lead the check to bounce, which would be that's a criminal offence part, and then you could end up in jail because of that, because sometimes the police does spot checks, and if you end up on that list, they'll put you into jail. So during a recession in Dubai, there's sort of like a little joke, but there's a lot of business people behind bars, which is a shame.
So with the way things are in Dubai at the moment, it seems it's booming. It seems to be property-wise, they're just building so much, but they're still selling so much as well. What's your take and view on where it's going?
There's bound to be a crash at some point because it always happens in Dubai. But I think it just depends when it's going to happen. So it's going to be very interesting. So I predict that the UK is going to go for a bit of a crash this year, next year, because at the moment we're seeing the mortgage rates going so high.
Yeah.
And those that are going to be impacted the most are the landlords that are not on a fixed rate.
Yeah.
Because because it might be they just come up for a renewal on a fixed period, but if they can't make their cash flow, so their rentals work, either they're going to default on their payment or they're going to end up selling. Yeah. But the problem that we know is that if there's a lot of stock that comes onto the market, if people are struggling to get a good mortgage rate, the mortgage activity is going to come to a bit of a halt, right? So that will end up bringing on a property crash.
Yes, so you'll have an excess supply and not enough demand to take up supply.
But obviously, if you're positioning yourself for a crash, i.e. you've built up some cash reserves, it's a great time to get in to negotiate some good deals. Yeah.
I think we're certainly in for some interesting times. Just earlier, I caught a snippet on the news that the standard rate for a home purchase at the moment is 6.6% on a mortgage.
Absolutely.
The highest it's been for 15 years. And when I first got starting, probably about 17 years ago, a couple of years, I kind of struggled to get started. But then I really picked up momentum when the market crashed, because I was just stumbling over deals every day. I was sourcing property to sell on to other people. And that's where I had really learnt the property market, understood motivated sellers, understood that market, did lots of deals during that time, and then also creative stuff like lease options, went on to do quite a lot of those. Then the market started changing, 12, 13, 14. By about 2015, 16, we were doing very little of that kind of stuff because there was the prices were rising, sellers weren't as motivated, there were fewer motivated sellers around, all our marketing activity was not performing as well. And I think right now, the time that we're in at the moment is probably the first time since I've been in this industry that we've started to see lots of motivated sellers again. So just this, we were talking earlier, just this current weekend, I was running a workshop on deal finding, and we were negotiating deals direct with vendors. We'd already done the marketing, we generated the leads direct from the sellers, having conversation, but negotiated 20, 30, 40, even £50,000 discounts off those prices. What they're doing there, which was even last year would have been unheard of.
Yeah, you couldn't.
Yeah. And I think this will probably last for maybe a couple of years. So I 100% agree there is a window of opportunity right now.
Yeah. So we'll have that here. How many years do you think this will go on for?
My guess is about 2 years.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
So let's see how it impacts Dubai.
Yeah.
Dubai is booming at the moment.
Yeah.
The reason that there's loads of people bringing their money in from Russia.
Yes.
Yeah. So literally, I've got a few friends there that have sold their properties to Russian buyers. Yeah.
And some of that, sorry to interrupt you, some of that would be like Russian money is not so popular in the UK right now.
Yeah.
Places like this.
Yeah.
So the Russians say, oh, that's fine. We'll take our money where it's.
Yeah. Hence the owner of the football club, the one that was at Chelsea. He was a Russian.
I know what you mean. I'm not a big fan of football generally, but I know.
Yeah.
Abramovich.
Yeah, that's it. So he sold his shares, right? He took his money out of the UK essentially in case it got frozen for whatever reason. Well, because of the politics.
Yeah.
But Dubai is a very popular place for countries that have political issues.
Yes.
At the moment. Yeah.
I was in Istanbul a few weeks ago, and there's very similar conversations there with the property people. There's a lot of Russian money coming into Turkey. Yeah. Because the money's there, they'll just find other places for it. So we were saying about the market and slowdown and what we think will happen in Dubai.
Yeah, so I think it's quite hard to say when there's going to be another crash, because if it's getting, the money in from different countries, I think unless the conflicts stop, right, which it might do depending on the American election, I think, right? Yeah, because, I don't know how that's going to go, but we won't go into it.
Yeah.
But if they could pacify the conflict between the Russian and Ukrainian war, I think that's when we'll probably see a bit more of a stop.
Yeah.
However, going on to that subject, there would be a massive opportunity in both countries if you're a business person to even help the economy there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you see yourself going back to do property in Dubai? Because you still are doing some property in Dubai. It's not that you've sold off everything and gone.
Yeah, so we've got some rent to rents and Airbnbs, and we've got a few properties there still.
So you still run an Airbnb model, service accommodation model in Dubai remotely from here.
Yeah, but with caution.
Okay.
But with caution only because I see. So at the beginning of this year, I was like, yeah, our property's doing really well. Let's just go all guns blazing in Dubai. But I have put a little bit of a halt on that.
Okay.
And the reason is because I think the opportunity is actually in the UK. You don't want to go to a country where it's booming to, be investing at the top of that sort of rise. I'm waiting for it to crash to then invest in if you're going to buy. So I'm just at the moment just waiting.
And the market's always changing and evolving, and we have to be mindful of that we just don't get completely oblivious to what's going on around us, and things could be falling around and collapsing. We think, it's all fine. We need to be aware of the changes and they might impact us.
But it's not, right? So I actually perfectly understand where my USP, or as a family group, where our USP is actually making the cash flow work during bad times or having a look at different niches.
Yeah.
Because it's all right buying property, isn't it? But it takes a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whether you're getting a mortgage or not. But to make that monthly cash flow work is a different ball game. It's running a business.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of cash flow. That's kind of the core thing that we need to get right in property. And sometimes people don't treat property as a business. But the reality is a business, and we need to manage those books well to make sure that cash flow works well.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I like the accommodation or service apartments, or even contractor bookings or working with companies, is I like to see not a monthly cash flow, but daily.
Yes.
Yeah, daily, weekly. So you've got to be on the pulse of that. You can't. I don't think you should ever always completely go 100% with a traditional model. Got to get active, get business in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And based in Cambridge, where the values are super high, it's a nice affluent area. How do you make property work when the prices are so high? And you get this also in London when people are surrounded by very expensive property. How do you get started? How do you get cash flow going in a place like that?
Rent to rent is the best place to start. So that's because you don't need to buy the property, which will cost you at least $500,000, right, to get started. And it probably, by the time you do purchase a $500,000 property, the cash flow doesn't look as good because you've invested quite a lot in.
Yeah.
So hone your skills on, start with one property. If you get the landlord to agree, you could do a subleasing model. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It doesn't matter whether it's the HMO model or it's one where you get daily, money in from, for example, service accommodation, Airbnb. But you need to start working on how you control the finances. And we had to, so we're still here, so it means that we learned a big lesson over COVID. So how you control what's going out and versus what's coming in. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work for everyone. Like I was telling you off camera, we've had some properties that we've had to take back, where we actually rented those properties out to a rent-to-rent operator.
Yeah, so just to give some context to that.
Yeah.
So this is where you either own the property or you've rented it from another landlord.
Yeah.
And then you pass it out to another renter to take from you, sit in the middle to create profit. And they've struggled to meet their commitment, so you've taken the property back.
Yeah. So it's very important that you take, so let's just go back a little bit to explain that scenario a little bit better. So maybe we make a little bit of a rental premium from the rent that we pay the landlord and the rent-to-rent operator, i.e. a corporate.
Yeah.
I classify that as a corporate let, and they've used the property to then go, for example, and to run their Airbnb or service accommodation business from. But they, for some reason, they struggled or they've not been able. So I would have expected, to be honest, it's quite interesting for them to come back and renegotiate a little bit on the rent or something. But it's literally, for one of them, it's just been no contact.
Right, bury the head in the sand.
Yeah, and that's been interesting. So if you are watching this podcast, I'm still open to having a conversation with you. But we've had to take those properties back when that problem's arisen very quickly. Yeah. So within 14 days.
Yeah. And your contract is such that it allows you to just take control back over that property if you're not being paid.
So that's very important when you do, if you're running this model with a company that you can also get access.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of it, really. Yeah. So you don't lose money. Yeah, or because you still have a deposit that you can offset.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if you don't have a deposit, you've got the furniture.
Yeah.
Yeah, to go and list it.
Yeah, I remember during COVID when we started getting the NHS model starting to work well for us, we were actually taking on other rent-to-renters properties who were struggling to meet their commitments. So we said, okay, well, we'll take that on because now we're starting to build up a demand from this sector here. Now we don't have enough accommodation to provide them. But also very cautiously, the way we set up the contract is we could exit out of them quickly because we didn't know how long this was going to run for.
So I would guess something to ask you, because it's the same spirit that we're operating in. How did you get your NHS contacts? What did you do that was different for everyone else?
Yeah, I think IDAS was very proactive in the team. He was like, okay, right now what we're seeing is medical staff, hospital staff, NHS staff, they are moving around. Some of them need accommodation staying. Some, for example, doctors are not going back to their families because they've been exposed in the hospitals to potentially risk. So they need to stay in isolation. So it was just lots and lots of calls of how can we tap into who makes the decisions of where people stay. And I think that's all it was. It's just really, rather than saying, okay, what can we do? It was being proactive. What do we need to do to find the contacts that will help us get some of that business in? And once you find a little vein and you find a way in, then that person can introduce to somebody else and that person might connect with somebody else, and it just makes it much easier once you get your foot in the door, as it were.
Brilliant. I've got a question for you, actually. Did you have any issues with payment, or is it if it was from the NHS?
Yeah, I think some of the payments were a bit slow, if I remember, but it wasn't a major problem. We were being paid. But that is actually a big risk. It's an important point you highlight, because if your dependency is on one provider paying you and they hold payment back, that could have a massive cash flow impact in terms of what you're doing.
Yeah, so I think the main thing is don't bury your head in the sand. We have a problem. You've got to tackle it head on.
Yeah.
But it can be daunting.
Yeah.
So I would say for those that have suffered during COVID time, and as a result there was repercussions, right? Hasn't been, last year was still tough, right? Don't worry, just get back into it. Yeah.
Why do you think there are some operators now starting to struggle?
There's competition. And if they were new competition, so not
more
just people
coming into the marketplace with more properties, so there's more supply.
More supply. Landlords where the single let model is not working for them, or the HMO model is not working. They see Airbnb as the next best thing, right? So a lot of transition over from that model, but they will suffer as well because you've got to find the niches within the niche, if that makes sense. It
reminds me of when I first started, we would see buy-to-let landlords, some of them starting to struggle a little bit, and there was this, for a year or two, there was this big shift to everyone staying the housing to HMOs, because there's going to be more money in HMOs. That will save us. And now it seems to be a similar thing to service accommodation. Or people are thinking, actually, we can go short stay, Airbnb, service accommodation to generate more income. But then you're oversupplying the market. Yeah.
Those that do well operate the model a little bit differently. I'll give you an example. And this is just, you think outside the box. So I know of a successful operator. So they do HMOs, but they leave one room where they run short-term rentals from.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I was like, how does that work? Because because from experience, your long-term tenants, so they get annoyed with that person who's coming in.
Someone's coming and going with a suitcase all the time.
Yeah, and they're using everybody's things, So what they do is that they put a minimum stay of 30 days. Yeah, so they tend to get actually as a couple of months.
Right, so they're doing almost like a 1-month contract.
Yeah, so it's a little bit more better. And that seems to work for them quite well. So they've, so just like being creative, right?
Yeah.
So armed with this, and I would say a lot of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Saj, I would say if you're doing rent to an HMOs, you might be suffering a little bit now if you are just profiting from that one room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I've never been a big fan of 4-bed HMOs because I think you barely make money on 4. It's 5, 6, and 7, which tend to be really profitable. And beyond that, I think it's a completely different model than in terms of the number of people in shared accommodation. So I think the sweet spot is 6 and 7. That's what we like. But to answer your question about it changing, so we've got a number of rent-to-rents that are now coming to an end this year that we've had for a long time. Because I did a lot of 7-10 year type deals as well.
Amazing. I didn't know they existed, by the way, until recently.
Oh,
that
long
you could,
lease.
yeah, such a long lease. Yeah.
I remember one of my lease options was 21 years.
Oh, wow. So a lot of them are lease options.
No, these are just standard rent.
okay.
I remember a lease option I did, that was the first one I did that long. I think 21 years, that's a long time.
Yeah.
The intention was never to keep it that long. It was just, if we've got it for that period, we can decide what to do. And with these rent-to-rent, some like 7 years, 10 years, and we spent a fair bit of money on them, which also, when I explained that, some people sounds a little bit crazy. You spent 20 grand on somebody else's house. Yeah, but I'm making 10 grand a year for 10 years. But now what's happened is the rents recently have increased so much that the landlord's saying, nah, this is what I want. And at that point, it's just not viable for us. So we'll return those. So for example, we were paying like £850 and now the rent is like £1,400 or £1,500. That's just wiped out our margin if we pay the higher amount. So we'll just hand those properties back.
Yeah. We will actually have a chat. I won't disclose this other model that I'm working on, because maybe that might be another
strategy.
Yeah, that might be, this is the
test it
HMOs.
first,
Test it first. There might be another conversation we're having. But I don't think it works, because you're just, as a rent-to-rent HMO operator, you're taking on a lot of risk, right? Especially with the increase of the bills, the energy bills, we would say it's tripled in some cases. And then if one room doesn't pay their rent because they've lost their job or they're just being cheeky, then you're wiped out, right?
Profit's gone.
Yeah, so it's a bit risky.
Yes, you have to be careful. And in the early days, what I saw happen with rent to rent is, you see lots of people want to try to do it. A lot of people would give up because getting that first deal often is hard, and many people give up before they get the first one. Those that get the first one and go on to do 2 or 3, some of those would then just accelerate very quickly. And before you know it, they've got 10, 12, 15 units. I think, hang on a minute, it was only 6 months ago you had one. So you haven't really been through a full cycle, and all of a sudden you've got this huge portfolio.
Oh, yeah.
And the risk just explodes. And unfortunately, many of those have just gone on to fall over because they haven't understood the growth.
Yeah, and the systems you got to put in place. So we were talking about when all the rent's collected, when it gets dispersed to landlords and other outgoings as well. There has to be a bit of a plan.
Managing that cash flow.
Yeah, I think some of it you can only learn also through experience.
Yes, by doing.
Yeah,
there's so much you can learn in theory. I was having a conversation with somebody else recently about, back in the early days, I keep saying the early days like I'm some kind of old man. I'm not that old, really.
You're looking younger as well.
I'll tell you that. What would happen is we'd really struggle to get information and find out how something works. So people would talk to me about Nominee down. I think, what is that? How does that work? How do you do it? And it would be really difficult to get that information. There were maybe 4 or 5 networking events in the whole country. Now there's literally that in every town or city.
Yeah.
So information was the challenge. But we've gone from that to the other extreme of there's information overload. So much information out there. It's almost like confusing of, you've got 20 people giving you their version of how something works, and you think, okay, what's the correct version? How does it work?
Sometimes you just got to go and find it yourself, right? Yeah.
The learning is in the doing. You've got to go out and start to implement, and then there's so much more you'll learn by going through that process.
Yeah, agree.
So tell me, we've been talking a lot about controlling property, rent to rent, service accommodation, overseas. When did you first start buying property? When did you first start owning property?
So back in Dubai, that's when I started. And in the UK, when I came back.
Okay.
Yeah. So how my mindset's changed is before, when I came back, I still had a bit with my family, like, I want to build up my own and then show them the results.
Yeah.
But actually it's easier when you can leverage off your family stuff. And we're a close family anyway.
Yeah.
So as a family, our property portfolio is probably about 6 million.
Okay.
Yeah, around that mark. But I've come to that stage where I've we don't really need to add to it anymore, because to be honest, everyone can live very comfortably off that. And there are some properties that are lined up in terms of, if we have an emergency, we could just sell those.
Yeah.
Right. And then there are those that we will never sell because it's part of mum and dad's legacy or history, or there's some sort of history behind it. Yeah. So that's but I think I was going to buy quite a few properties last year. So there was about £6 million worth of deals in a pipeline.
Okay.
Including some blocks of flats.
Yes. I remember speaking last year about it.
Guest houses and some land.
Yeah.
But then I pulled the rug on it at the end of last year. So we withdrew all the offers.
Yeah.
Mainly because when you know you're going into a recession of some sort and where the interest rates are basically, dotting around, from my experience from managing our family stuff, and the main one was actually a development, office to flat conversion that we did. My family did, but they'd run into trouble. So I was working to buy them.
Yeah.
I had to salvage that that project.
Yeah.
But that basically led me to understand how risky it is. To be in that position, overleverage yourself when you're going for a recession. So what happened there, Saj? So this is an interesting experience, which is, this is before I got into property in Dubai even. So parents were doing this conversion, and my brother, who was he had 1 year's experience in architect's firm, was sort of project managing that. But I had no idea what a development loan was then either. So Lloyds Bank was they were financing the build. And it just went really wrong. So we worked with a family's friend's construction company, but they didn't do things properly.
Right.
So we had no building regs in place. So work stopped, and there was a lot of cowboy work going on. But as you know, it's very hard for an incoming company to then take over works, because we had a lot of the walls that were sealed, but the pipes behind it weren't connected.
There's a lot of unforeseen. We don't know what the quality of that work is. It's going to be easy for somebody else to pick it up, or they're going to have to unravel quite a lot of things.
So I remember coming home for Christmas that year, and then some sort of survey came through the post, and I was like, what is this? And it was a survey that Lloyds Bank had made my family get to see what stage we're up to with the work, the status, right? So I took that and basically had to run with it, because it had gone to Lloyds Bank sort of a repossessions team at that point. So
they were not happy about what was happening.
No. So, and at that point, I was still thinking, I don't understand why we've signed up for this 12-month loan. I didn't understand it then. I was like, why are we not on a normal mortgage where, it's for a long-term product? I didn't understand it then. And so I got on board, and this is when you use your skills, right? So I use the skills I learned from the law firm when we are managing a case, for example. So I put together a table of action plans. And the action plans had deadlines on. Right. So I spoke with the bank manager, had a conversation that I'm on board now, and this is what I'm going to do. And so that was a massive learning curve. So I had to line up with the help of the coordination of my family on the ground in Cambridge, separate contractors for each bit of work, because it was difficult to get somebody in to look after the whole thing, because we had to redo. So there were, I remember we kept failing the acoustic test at one point and trying to find solutions, putting carpet.
That can be a real pain in the backside, because you don't know where that problem could have occurred.
Yeah, but I think it was a good learning curve, because that table of works of, but anyway, so what happened, I had to end up getting another bridge. So it was a very expensive lesson. Otherwise, there was only a certain amount of time that Lloyds Bank would extend that.
So that was to replace the Lloyds line.
Yeah, so Shawbrooks Bank came into place. So it was the first time we encountered a commercial lender such as Shawbrooks. So managed to get another bridging loan, and then exit off a long-term loan. But I remember thinking it wasn't just the work involved. My parents really suffered during that time, and my brother did as well. Their mental health and well-being.
It can be very, very stressful.
Yeah, because before I got involved, I remember my mum was borrowing some money off her friends, and I didn't like her to be in that position where she had to borrow money off people, 10 grand here, 20 grand here, because of what was going on. I didn't ever want them to be in that position, and it caused my brother, who was still very young at that point, lots of stress. Maybe he went through a little bit of depression or burying his head in the sand. And I think, to be honest, I was a little bit mean to everyone then. I was literally like making them doing stuff, trying to make sure it's all done. So it was teamwork, but it was really hard, and I don't want to put my family through that.
But sometimes, as you highlighted earlier, it's very easy for someone to bury their head in the sand at that point and say, hopefully it will go away. It won't go away. We have to take responsibility, and that's what you did. You took responsibility. It's okay. How can we find a solution to this?
Yeah, so my viewpoint was, I never want my family to suffer again during a time recession where things are so tight that because the thing was, it losing that building would have been very painful for us because it was, I think, the first building my dad bought.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the first building he actually had his restaurant, which now has another tenant in. So we don't run the business anymore.
So that's one of those buildings you never would want to sell. You want to keep in the.
Yeah, because there's been a history behind it. Because he actually he sold his lease before he owned it.
Okay.
So we were running a restaurant to an Indian restaurant.
Okay.
And he actually had a legal battle with his landlord, who just didn't want an Indian restaurant to operate there.
Right.
But he came out of that off telling the landlord, give him the option that he was going to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole building.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like it, so there was a lot of negotiation there. So it's very interesting because we had different nationalities. The landlord was a Jewish landlord who had lots of properties in London as well. So there was a whole process to it.
Cultural challenges there as well going on.
Yeah. So, and lots of thinking that went behind it. So that would have been very difficult. And it was also that restaurant that we slept there in the basement when we were very, very poor before Dad built his property empire. So that we would have been devastated on more of a personal level if anything happened to it.
That emotional connection with that building.
Yeah, and that is something that, this property will pass down to our next generations, and they won't be allowed to sell it. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds a bit mean,
the
doesn't
next
it?
generation, little tales.
Yeah. So our portfolio consists of other properties that if they ever run into trouble, use those properties, sell them. But these ones have a story behind it, which is the foundation of our family roots in the UK. Yeah, so it means a lot. Yeah, do you have anything like that in your family?
No, we were never really from a property background. Actually, having said that, you said something interesting earlier, made me think about grandparents. So my grandfather, from my father's side, and the family, they had a lot of land in Pakistan, but the government decided to build a dam there at that time, and all that land was taken as a compulsory purchase order, if you like, and often little pittance. But now when we look back, that land was enormous in size and in value. And that's where the emigration started, where my father and his brothers and the extended family moved to the UK to set roots here. But my father fell ill when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. His kidneys failed, so he was quite ill. He was quite ill for a long time. And my mother was a full-time carer. Being the only son, you kind of feel a bit of pressure. I probably grew up a little bit quicker. But actually, that's what really created the hunger inside me that, like yourself, you're saying, actually, I don't want to be in a position where we're poor, we can't afford anything. There must be a way. How can we? And I think that hunger's always stayed inside me.
Same. I don't think it ever goes away, really, because I think it's just the way we're wired, right? Potentially, as in, okay, the government's confiscated all this land that we used to own, but there's nothing we can change about history. So what can I do to fulfill that longing for that such a waste and such a pity? What can we do now to make a difference about it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, armed with the skills, the internet,
Absolutely.
As long as you're not lazy, I think you could do most things.
Yeah, we're all blessed with the same 24 hours at the end of the day. It's what we choose to do with them that's important.
Yeah.
So Lesley, just before we finish then, what is next for you? What do you see for the next few years for you and your business?
I think I'm going to keep, not that I think I know, we're going to keep building on that cash flow, whether it's through property or other businesses. So I'm looking to acquire, as you know, some different businesses. And the reason for that is because, yes, we can always park our money into property, but that cash flow, that daily, that monthly money coming in, I feel more stable when I see a good chunk come in, and we've sort of not mastered, but I would say we have a pretty good control now over, how to manage your cash flow in businesses. And I think there's no point always earning lots and lots and lots of money if you can't keep it as well, right? Or allocate it safely elsewhere. So there's also dangers to growing too fast. But I think that after going through all of that and, earning money in different countries, I think we're positioned. And just to let everybody know, it's not just me that's doing everything. There's a family roots, a family team there that are behind, supporting and helping.
Family business.
Yeah.
Lesley, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure spending this time with you and having a conversation with you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.